Happy Friday, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the founder and lead principal consultant for NWC, and you have joined Intentional Conversations VodCast. We're so glad you're here. We have been anticipating you, and we have a great lineup that is, I know, going to be filled with rich content, and we are so glad that you are here joined with us. We're just giving it a minute for folks to get assembled and settled into our virtual learning space as we learn with and from each other. I also want to acknowledge that in addition to all of the folks who are joining us right now as part of the Zoom community, we also have some folks that are joining us live via LinkedIn. And so welcome to both communities. We're so glad you're here. I always like to share that if you happen to catch us right now live on LinkedIn, you can optimize your experience by becoming a part of the actual Zoom VodCast community. And you can do that by visiting the link that my team will place into the chat. And we will welcome you as you may decide to navigate over to Zoom. But otherwise, if you want to stay right there on LinkedIn, that's totally fine too. If you would go to the chat or go to the comments, if you're on LinkedIn, let us know where you're joining the conversation from. That is a question that we always like to ask every week because it just helps us to know who is a part of our virtual community. And we know that we have a community of folks that are represented all over the United States and even in some global markets. And we are always very grateful. We know that you probably could have many different opportunities to receive some knowledge and information as you're growing your knowledge base around diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the fact that you join us is always very much appreciated from our team. I want to let you know a couple things. We do have closed caption that's available today for those who may need it. This is our way at NWC really showing up for the disability community and being very much inclusive to those that are part of that community. I also want to let you know that throughout our time together today, I want you to feel free to use that chat. The chat is going to be a way to get proximate to each other as we learn with and from each other. If something comes up that resonates with you, I want you to place those thoughts and sentiments into the chat. If there's a question and we haven't quite yet gotten to the point where we're taking questions, but you don't want to forget it, place it into the chat. We're watching that periodically. We're bringing those conversations into the live discussions I'll be having with our wonderful guest co-host today, which I will introduce momentarily. But the chat is our way, again, of extending this sense of community among each of us that are here together today. And so once again, my name is Dr. Nika White. This is Intentional Conversations VodCast, and we're so glad you're here. Welcome again. Hey, yes, let the conversation begin. As the screen indicated, I am, again, if you're just joining us, Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and you are a part of the Intentional Conversations VodCast community. This is a community where every single week, Friday from 11 to 12 Eastern Standard Time, we are joined here where we intersect conversations around diversity, equity and inclusion, leadership, and business. And so I want to give a special shout out to the team at NWC that works incredibly hard to ensure that this virtual learning experience is one that is worthwhile. And speaking of which, many of you reach out to us by email, by text, by different messages on social media to let us know how valuable the Intentional Conversations VodCast has been for you. And so if that's been your experience, we're going to invite you today to maybe place some of those thoughts into the chat. We would love to be able to maybe highlight some of the experiences that our community is sharing with us as part of how they are seeing value into being part of this podcast. So June is Pride Month. Happy Pride Month. Want to continue to acknowledge that even though this is Pride Month, we have to make sure that we're continuing to advance all of the efforts that have been in play now for quite some time to ensure humanity is centered, and that means opportunity for all. That means that the hate and the discrimination and the inequities need to be eradicated. So help us to stand in solidarity with those that are part of the LGBTQIA+ community during this month, but every month, every day of the year. June is also Immigrant Heritage Month. And so we like to at NWC make sure that we're taking opportunities to educate our community around some of these national observances. Some probably are a bit more familiar to you than others. I was really just teasing one of our colleagues earlier by saying it seems like every single month there are multiple things we are acknowledging and observing, but that's okay. June is also Immigrant Heritage Month, in case you didn't know that. Now you know. And we're going to be celebrating Juneteenth on June the 19th. That is an opportunity for us to really center the experiences of Black community, also to make sure that we are understanding and recognizing the historical significance of Juneteenth and all that the ancestors have given to allow us today to live a life of freedom. And we are so appreciative of all of those organizations who have reached out to solicit our help and support of allowing us to curate special learning experiences for your organization in observation of Juneteenth. Now, I often share, you've been hearing this for quite some time, and I will continue to share that Inclusion Uncomplicated is available. It's available in forms, including on Kindle, on audiobook, as well as in hard copy. This is in partnership with Forbes Book. This is book number 3 for me. It's all about being a transformative guide to help people simplify DEI. So if you haven't gotten it yet, I hope that you will run and get it and write a review. Those reviews are critically important, but I appreciate you in advance. I also want to share some really exciting news for me that took place recently. What you're looking at right now is a 4-story level billboard right in the heart of Times Square. And as you can see, my book is being pubbed here. And I am so excited about this. I never imagined that this could be a reality. So while for some it may seem insignificant, for me, I'm so grateful. I'm humbled by it. And I wish I were in New York City to be able to witness this live. But that was not possible. But nonetheless, I wanted to share this with each of you as part of this VodCast community. So thank you all for the many ways in which you've shown up for me by supporting me and my book launch. I'm so grateful. Okay, so speaking of the book, just to wrap up, I want to let you know that we have some learning experiences that have been specially curated and inspired by the book, Inclusion Uncomplicated. They all are known under the umbrella of Unravel the Knot. In my book, I talk a lot about unraveling the knot so that we can make sure that what feels really daunting and intimidating to us can allow us to have a greater ease of engaging into this work, not because the work is not hard, but because the work is just that important. So we have to make it practical. So there's multiple ways in which you can bring the Unravel the Knot learning experience to your organization, and we invite you to contact us so we can share a little bit more. My team will place into the chat the link on the website where you can learn more, including some download tools with a bit more information, as well as some videos. Now, at this juncture, what I often like to do is provide information for what you can look forward to in future weeks. And our lineup for June is fire. And we have Future Kane that's going to be joining us on June 16th. And we're going to be discussing social, emotional leadership, wellness, equity, and humanities connectedness for our future. You get the play in there for our Future Kane. You know, if you don't know her, look her up. She is incredible. And I can't wait to be in conversation with her. The week following, on June 23rd, we're going to have Dana Brownlee, and we're going to be listening to the past, really unpacking and understanding how those outside the DEI space can be vocal about workplace anti-racism and the difference between calling in and calling out within the DEI community. I know these are topics that are really passionate and that Dana is really passionate about, so I can't wait for her to share some of her sentiments with you. So mark your calendars and join us accordingly. And then rounding out the month of June is my friend, my dear friend, my sister, Netta Jenkins. And Netta has a new book that's out, and I can't wait for her to come share about that. But also she's going to be talking about closing the racial wealth gap through radical allyship, removing subjectivity from DEI measurement process, and how leaders can overcome unconscious bias. And so join us for Netta Jenkins at the end of the month. And if you happen to know of a great person that you think would add value to our podcast community, we invite you to make that recommendation. You can do so by sending an email to my colleague, Amora Carter. Her email is right there on the screen, but it's amora@nikawhite.com. We'll place it into the chat. We're all booked up through September, but Q4 may be an opportunity just for you. And so keep that in mind, and we welcome an opportunity to hear from you regarding those recommendations. Now, it does me great pleasure to give a formal introduction of our guest co-host today. I am super excited to have her join us. We never take it lightly when someone says yes to our invitation, and I want to honor that by reading her full bio so that you can understand the accolades, the credentials, the experience in which she shows up to this space. Dr. Venessa M. Perry is an executive coach, author, and thought leader in the DEI and leadership spaces. As the CEO and founder of Health Resources Solutions, she assists organizations in creating long-term transformational change through a racial equity lens. She contributes by working in partnership with managers, directors, and C-suite executives, all to help them deliver real impact to their customers and their clients. Dr. Venessa has over 25 years of experience positioning organizations for growth by providing vision, strategy, and operational excellence. Working with government, for-profit, and nonprofit organizations, she has extensive experience in domestic and international public health and health policy, diversity, equity, and inclusion, organizational change, leadership development, and program evaluation. Dr. Venessa holds a Master's of Public Health degree, a Master's of Philosophy and Psychology, and a PhD in Industrial Organizational Psychology. She also earned a certified professional and executive coach credential from the Coaching and Positive Psychology Institute. Dr. Venessa is often asked to give keynotes and facilitate training on DEI and leadership, and she's also a frequent contributor to Forbes. And so if you've been part of our podcast community, you know what we do at this point in time. We find those words of affirmation that we can place into the chat to welcome our guest co-hosts. We will find those reactions, those emojis, whatever it is, but help me to ensure that Dr. Venessa Perry feels very much welcomed as she prepares to greet us. I am now going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to highlight Dr. Venessa so that she is up front and center along with me as we're going to be in conversation with each other. And Dr. Venessa, I'm so incredibly glad that you are here. I want to give you a chance to greet this audience, and I'll just ask that, as you're thinking about what you would like to share, perhaps think of something that maybe we would not know about you from reading your bio or from looking at maybe your LinkedIn profile. And we're just so glad to have you here. So thank you so much. Welcome, my friend.
Wow, thank you for having me, Dr. Nika. I totally appreciate it. So it's so funny, when I was getting dressed this morning, I had on a graphic tee. So I am a huge graphic tee fan. So when I saw your tee, I was like, I should have kept my graphic t-shirt on. And so I love your t-shirt. Look, it's so
Thank
appropriate
you.
for what we're talking about
I'll
today.
lean up so y'all can really see
Yes,
it, because this message
Black
is
women are
important. Black
dope.
women are dope. And I wore
Absolutely.
this because I knew that we were going to have a dope Black woman on today as our guest co-host. And so, yes, welcome.
Yeah, that's so funny. So, but I chose a more conservative shirt, but next time I will follow my instinct and go with my usual uniform, which is graphic tee and jeans.
And let me tell you, we will definitely have to make sure that a next time is on the agenda. We would love to have you back at some point. So, Dr. Venessa, one of the things that we like to do is to kind of talk about some of the nitty-gritty, some of the things that have found its way into media over the past, week or so, and just to get some reactions to it. We know that those items are typically very much top of mind for the community that joins our VodCast. And so there's a couple things that come up for me. First of all, you're in the DC area. So I want to ask about the air quality right now. I know that New York was really badly hit. Seems like it's improving a little bit, but then also it made its way to the Maryland and the DC area. So how are you doing and what's happening?
Yes. So for the last 2 days, the air quality has been horrible. It's been in like 160, 180. I was inside for 2 days straight.
Good
People
for
were
you.
back to wearing their masks. Fortunately, it is lifted considerably today, much better than what it was. I think it's about 70 today.
Okay.
So, so we definitely appreciate that. And it's sunny, but there's still this, I don't even know how I can describe it. It's like a quiet, like in the air and very
Yeah.
kind of unsettling. So
Yeah.
hopefully the rain will come. It's supposed to come this weekend and it will clear it out and we'll have some more clear and clean air.
Well, I hope so. We're certainly wishing that for all of the folks that are impacted by some of the issues that have occurred with the quality of the air. Someone used the word eerie. So as you were talking about
Yes.
how the feeling, yeah, and so I'm sure that is quite unsettling. But glad to know that at least we are seeing some improvement and some progress. And yes, definitely remain healthy. So let's shift and talk about Florida right now. There's a lot going on in Florida. A lot going on. So where do we
Yeah.
start?
Yeah. I don't even know where we start. Okay. So do we start with our economy and the GDP and how
Yeah.
much all of the immigrant population has left? So construction
Yeah.
projects, any real estate projects have halted.
Yeah.
The restaurant industry, the farms where the migrant workers were, we're not going to be getting oranges because they've all led. I literally read an article. One man said he has a farm and he's used to 300 people helping him pick oranges, and he had 5 people, and those 5 were his family.
Wow.
So
Wow. Well,
yeah,
one of the things that comes up for me is that I don't think that people realize that when these knee-jerk type of reactions, occur, exactly what the implications are to like the economy and
yeah,
to other things that just may not be top of mind. And so there's going to be certainly a trickle down effect that everyone is going to feel, right? And so I acknowledge the fact that this is Immigrant Heritage Month, and I really feel for the people that are being displaced and feeling like they have to leave
yeah,
in
yeah.
order to just be able to survive and feel safe. And so yeah, that's hard. That's really hard.
It's very hard, and I think that just the industry overall is going to be
Yeah.
hit very hard in Florida. I mean, this is obviously going to hit their tourism industry as well. And I know a number of conferences that are going to be there, this year, this summer, and next year.
Yeah.
And it's going to be tough for them. But I also don't think that we really realize that it has a broader impact for the country than just Florida. So yes, there's an immediate impact. But when we talk about, the gross domestic product and inflation, and if you recall during the pandemic, we had food shortages during that time as
Yeah.
well because people weren't working. So I think we may see those types of things again coming out of Florida. And obviously that's horrible for people of color, for Black and Brown people, who often rely on seasonal work, such as being on the farms, or even, just the tourist industry and things like that to survive. So them having to be displaced and going to other areas of the country to work that may be a little bit more friendly is very unsettling.
It's
Very
very
unsettling.
unsettling. Yeah. And, somewhat of a parallel, I mean, different issues, but definitely a parallel in terms of some of the inequities and just feeling like people can't thrive, certain populations can't thrive. We're seeing it with the LGBTQ plus community as well, that are, relocating to other areas that they feel like are going to serve them better than maybe some of the geographies that they came from originally. So I love the fact that you amplify these types of, again, decisions, and it impacts not just that very specific area, but it impacts us all over. So if you're sitting back and you're not in Florida, or you're not in one of the states that is finding its way into with all of these, stories that are hitting the media wavelength, and you're thinking, well, we're kind of good now. No, we all need to care and have a level of concern to do what we can to amplify voice of reason and voice of humanity. And so another really sad story that is unfolding day by day in Florida is the Black woman, the mother of 4 kids, that was murdered.
Yes.
Um,
Very sad.
And I don't know how many in this community are familiar with that story. So perhaps, Vanessa, you can share a little bit with us. And then if I think I remember seeing an article on CNN recently, maybe if the team can source it and place it into the chat. But tell us what you know about the story and your reactions to it, Dr. Vanessa.
Yeah, so unfortunately, a Black woman was kind of feuding with her neighbor. The neighbor, who was a white woman, said that, that I guess her children were too loud. The woman went to Florida, went to the woman's house to confront the woman, and the white woman shot her dead. And there was a lot of outcry because she was not immediately arrested. And she's claiming stand your ground, but she has since been arrested and has been charged with either manslaughter or second degree murder, or first, I can't remember exactly what it was, but just a very heartbreaking story. You have 4 children now who have lost their mother. And I think we just see a lot of this. There's a lot of this all over the country, this whole idea of stand your ground, don't knock on my door. I'm going to shoot you, we don't know who you are. It's just happening all over, and it's very, very sad. But I also think that we have to be very just careful and just diligent, because we're not living during the time when we can actually just knock on people's doors innocently and expect that because we're Black or brown or of another group that it's going to be okay and people are going to welcome us with open arms.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And let me just, interject that we don't highlight and share, this news, these types of stories because we want to dwell in the gloom and the doom. But this is reality and it's happening. And there still are a large percentage of people that do not want to acknowledge the fact that race is still, racism, let me say that, not race, racism is still a huge issue that is taking the lives of brown and Black people. And so we have to continue talking about it. Not talking about it does not make it go away. And so very sad story. One of the things that I remember reading about the story is that I think that the children may have been playing in the woman's yard because, and then when she told them to leave the yard, the kids did, and they did quite abruptly to get out of the yard because, again, some feuding had been taking place. It wasn't really a really friendly area, if you will. And one of the kids left the iPad or some type of, electronic that was of value.
Mm-hmm.
So, and went to get it back. And that's, I think, when the feuding kind of started. And so when she went to try to say, I need to get my child's item back, personal item back, she was shot and killed. And so we have to acknowledge that this is not going away. And so I do appreciate a moment for us to just acknowledge that very hard story that many of us are processing right now. Okay, so I want to shift a little bit, Vanessa, and I want you to kind of tell us about your journey. We know that you have ample experience, and like many people say, you were doing this work of DEI before it really became sexy, right? And I put the air quotes there because a lot of folks will perceive that this is, something that's new and novel. I mean, it is evolved a good bit, but it's been around for a long time. And so I'm curious about your journey into the space. And then also very specifically, I'm curious about what you're seeing or the main differences between kind of early on in your career, your 25 plus year career, when you were doing this work, to what you're seeing now.
Yeah. So, I always tell people that I started out doing racial equity work because that's what we called it in the mid-90s. So it was racial equity, then it went to health disparities, and we started off with, I started off in healthcare, working in communities of color with the LGBTQ plus community. We didn't call it that at that time, but I worked in the HIV/AIDS community and public health. So, educating them, developing programs, evaluating their programs for them, and then subsequently went on into the government where, I was, worked on the Affordable Care Act and looking at vulnerable populations and underrepresented groups and ensuring that they had health care. And then it just kind of exploded, from healthcare to education to philanthropy, to technology, to financial services. And all of a sudden, everybody kind of wanted to talk about equity. So, the language began to change.
Mhm.
I tell people that first we talked about racial equity, then it was racial equality, then it was disparities, so, and like now we're saying diversity. And so I see this, what I would say is full circle moment actually in the work that I'm doing, because I've been doing it for so long, in which things are the same in some ways, but they're different. So
Yeah.
the things that we talk about now, I mean, we know that, of course, 2020 came in, the pandemic came in, George Floyd happened, and folks started saying, hey, we need to make commitments to the Black community, Black Lives Matter, and all of those things. And I think what we're seeing now is a slowing down of people talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, slowing down of talking about racial equity in some ways, and in some populations. But for the most part, things I would say are changing, definitely
Yeah.
changing for sure. The more they change, but the more they stay the same, even in terms of
Mhm.
the way we refer to it. Is it DEI? Is it DEIB? Is it DE?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
lots of changes. I've seen them in my career, and in terms of who has and who hasn't, those things have not changed. The haves and the have-nots. It is ultimately all about privilege when it comes down to it, and so we still have lots of work to do in terms of
Yeah.
dismantling these systems of oppression, and making sure that the voices of those who are underrepresented, or we're now the majority of
Yeah.
people,
It's global
making
majority.
voices, yes, the global majority, making sure that our voices are heard.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear you talk about the evolution of, the nomenclature of this work, right? And how it has evolved a good bit. And that has become somewhat of a tension point, I'll say. And I use that language because I know I have, and you probably have as well, Dr. Venessa, been a part of these discussions where it seems like sometimes it can become a crutch because people are so tied up with trying to decide, how do we label this? Is it diversity? Is it equity? Is it inclusion? Is it belonging? Do we nix all of it and call it something different? And I feel like it's keeping us from doing the actual work.
Yes.
Like, I don't really care what you call it right now. Just do the work.
Yes.
Just do the work, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
I think there's something to be said for that. I also think that it adds to some of the complexity. I'm all about kind of, trying to break down all the complexity that can happen around this work. But I think that it creates confusion because
Yes.
people are like, well, everybody just got used to like diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now you want to shift and call it belonging, and just do the work. If you know
Yes.
what those tenets, those constructs mean, and in theory and in practice, do the work. And I
Yes.
promise you, everything else is going to take care of itself. Do the work. But anyway, it
Absolutely.
sounds like you agree. So,
Yes. Oh, no,
okay.
totally agree with you. Totally agree. It's very interesting because I think that the nomenclature has become a distraction.
It
In
has.
terms of what letters we add. It's like alphabet soup. At
It
the end of the
is.
day, it should really be about outcomes and impact at the end of it. It doesn't matter if we call it DEI,
Yes.
DE Jedi, none of it matters. We
Yes. There you
focus
go. Justice is
on,
in there too.
yes,
Yes.
yes, absolutely.
And I
Let's
don't,
focus on the data. Let's focus on
right.
the outcomes, right?
Right.
The impact that we're making. And then it doesn't matter what we call it. And so that is really what I am focused on. So I don't care what people call it. And I tell people, even as it relates to inclusion and belonging, they're actually the same thing. When you talk about the impact in the
Right.
outcome, it's the same thing. So you can say
Right.
DEI, or you can say DEB, it's the same. There's this whole, slew
Absolutely.
of consultants that feel that we should just use DEB. But here's the thing, the impacts and the outcomes is really what matters. And that's what
Right.
to concentrate on. And we need to center our work around that, not on the nomenclature. Because like I said, this nomenclature has changed, and I foresee it changing again.
Oh, absolutely. It will. And hopefully with messages and conversations like this, people will stop kind of, buying into the change every couple months, right? And even like shifting the sequence of the letters, like, well, we put Woody first, and so we say EDI. I mean, okay, still work. Still work. Okay, I think that we have beat a dead horse with that one. So I want to move on. I want to talk about your business, because the name of your company is Health Resources Solutions. But what I know, just because we've been in a community with each other for quite some time, some people may conclude that it's all about, the health piece of it. But it's much broader than that. So
Sure.
give us a little bit of additional insight as to why that's the case. I think that you probably started very specifically in that space. But then also I want to understand more about your coaching and your consulting services.
Sure. So, it's interesting. I've been going back and forth with the name. And so at some point this year, probably going to do a rebrand. But the way that I frame it is, we started out in healthcare, but now what I look at is I look at this work from a holistic perspective. And I look at it in terms of a humanistic perspective. So it's not just about the health of the physical health.
Right.
It's also about the emotional health. It's about the psychological health. It's about
Love
the
that.
health of an organization and not just an individual. And so the work that we do is really about organizational development. It's about leadership development and executive coaching, and making sure that we're able to increase the capacity of not only organizations, but also of the people who are leading those organizations. So oftentimes that might be around, diversity, equity, inclusion. It may be around, change management. DEI is change management. That's the
Right.
big thing that I tell everybody right now. Like, if you don't understand that DEI is organizational development and change management, you're going to have a difficult time with this work. So those are many of the things that we focus on. We focus on evaluation. What's the return on investment for the programs that you have? How are you serving your communities? How are you serving your employees and things like that? So it's much more than just our racial equity, diversity, and inclusion work, but it is many other pieces as well. It's really about increasing the capacity of individuals and organizations to ensure that they are holistically, optimally performing.
I love that. And you mentioned that you are considering, or maybe you have the work already underway, like a rebranding. And what I'll just offer this up for what it's worth, Dr. Venessa. I loved how you articulated that when you talk about health, it's not just the physical health, it's the health of the organization, the health of the person from a psychological perspective. And so I feel like it works. So don't necessarily feel like you have to navigate from it. I just, I loved how you were able to position the framing of how there's multiple sides to what you focus on within your business. Now, part of your work is also supporting Black women, and I want to talk a little bit about that, specifically Black women in leadership roles. So what are some of your strategies for helping to empower Black women and specifically help them to show up as their whole selves, when oftentimes spaces and places in society tell us that that's not welcome? We don't want your whole self.
It is very rewarding work. I love my work with Black and Brown women and really empowering them to have a voice in the corporate setting, or any type of organizational setting. And oftentimes what ends up happening is they experience such frustration around the intersection of racism and sexism. What we call in the research arena, we call it gendered racism. And so, people also call it, misogyny as well. But they experience so much around that, from stereotypes, from the microaggressions, to not getting the support that they need, not getting the mentorship, not getting the sponsorship that they need to not only survive, but to thrive in the corporate setting. Is really critical. So my work with them is really about helping them find their voice, ensuring that they have the tools that they need to navigate the work setting, to understand themselves more fully, how they show up, to communicate in a better manner, in a more effective manner, to approach situations with curiosity, and then also to use counter stories. And so understanding that this whole idea of who we are in the workplace is based on a story that people have. How do you impact that, or how do you confront that? You confront it with a counter story and recognize that we are all relational. My work, I consider this to be relational work.
Yeah,
DEI,
it
racial
is.
equity is relational work. This is not transactional work. And so the way they show up with people, the way they relate to people, it's really about the commonalities and the common ground and how you can shift the narrative and have a counter narrative in terms of who you are and what you represent and how there are similarities and there are synergies between the two organizations, the two people, the 10 people that actually can help you work towards the common good of the organization. So it is very meaningful work to me. I'm very passionate about it. Very thoughtful work, because ultimately I believe that when Black women are safe and secure and able to show up as their authentic selves, then they can thrive and they can not only help their communities, but they can help other communities as well.
Absolutely. I second that completely. Your passion is definitely showing as you're speaking about this topic and the work that you do with Black women. So I want to stay here for a second. I want to just amplify two things that you just shared that I thought were really powerful. The first is the acknowledgement that DEI work is relational work. And I love that. And I think that's also part of the complexity that is associated with it, because, we often are looking for something that's a bit more concrete in terms of the outcome. It's like, well, we don't really care about the feelings. We just want to know what the outcome is. Well, the outcome are the feelings, and those feelings count for something that's really important that has a domino effect across so many other dimensions. And so I love the recognition and amplification of DEI work being relational work. And then having a counter story, that's so rich. I think that so many of us sit back and we just accept the narratives that are told about us, and we begin to sometimes unconsciously succumb to them, right? It's like the fulfilling prophecy. If we hear something so often, we begin to kind of believe it ourselves. And so I love that part of your mentorship, your coaching, is to help people to arrive at those counter stories and to be bold enough to control that narrative. So I just wanted to amplify those really important points. Now, you have a program that's starting in July that I believe is specially curated that goes along with what we're talking about in terms of your work around women leadership, particularly women of color. So share a little bit more about that.
So, so this whole idea of the executive leadership development program, it's really a half-day program. It's focused on women of color and equipping them with the strategies to navigate the workplace. So communication skills, interpersonal skills, conflict resolution, well-being. I am really about well-being. The whole idea of, I don't want us to just survive, I want us to thrive. And so you will, in the coming weeks, you'll probably hear a lot more about, Black well-being, because there are a number of institutes. The Brookings Institute and Gallup have started this huge project, of which I'm a little bit involved in, only because I'm writing a book. But understanding this whole idea of Black well-being, what does that mean? And in terms of ensuring that there is racial equity. So you'll hear a lot about that. And so that's really what this program focuses on. It's the, Executive Leadership, Development Institute. I'm hoping to roll it out kind of on a monthly basis for the most part. It will be a half-day virtual training initially. I hope in the fall to make it in person, because I think that when we are together, that is actually when we are able to thrive and we're able to connect with people. So there's that part. And then I think the other part of that, and I don't, want to leave men of color out, because I think they're important. And I often think that they get left out of the mix in conversations. And that is, just some of the conversations I've been having with some colleagues around being able to have different types of programs to support, Black and brown men in their wellness,
Yeah.
because as we know, there is a lot happening around Black male suicide right now, Latino male suicide as well. And so making sure that there are programs that can support them as well.
No, I appreciate that. And speaking of, one of the things you and I were chatting about before the top of the hour is that June is, among many other things, National Men's Health Month.
Mhm.
And according to Very Well Health, statistically speaking, Black men live 7 years less than men of other racial groups. They also have higher death rates than Black women for all leading causes of death. And so I appreciate, again, you amplifying the need for us to pay attention to this very specific population as it relates to their health needs. I think that's big and that's really important. I love Black well-being. I love that labeling. And it just reminds me of how I have, as a practitioner in this space, been in conversations with people who very well intentioned would question, why do we have to create so much separation around everything? Why can't it just be what it is? And so some people probably are listening to that and they're saying well-being, well, everybody benefits from well-being. Everybody benefits from being healthy in their mind, their body, and their spirit. And I know that you have a great answer to this. So I want you to articulate how you would respond when people say that. But, let's just unpack that a bit. Is there a need to have Black well-being conversations?
Yes.
What would you say?
Yes. Yes, because I think what people don't understand is well-being is actually it is several pieces. It is not just your physical well-being or your emotional well-being. So when we start talking about well-being, we're talking about your education. We're talking about your socioeconomic status. We're talking about where you live. We're talking about how you get to work, your transportation, your childcare issues, whether or not you have to work at night, how you get to work, how far is your work, what are you eating, are there food deserts in your neighborhood? So there are all of these things that comprise Black well-being, and there's actually an index, and it's what we talk about. It's called the social determinants of health, and so these are the things that comprise Black well-being. And so when we talk about, racial equity and well-being, we want to ensure that we're looking at all of these things. So as I said, there are a number of think tanks right now. The Brookings just launched a huge project around Black well-being. The Gallup also has a huge project around Black well-being. They have a huge amount of data on Black well-being that I didn't even realize existed until I started doing some additional research for my book project. So it's very important that we understand well-being for communities of color, because without all of these other pieces in place, if we don't start to break down these systems of oppression and address these issues, we won't be able to have well-being in communities of color at all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We were talking earlier about how the labeling and some of the ways in which we refer to different, concepts can evolve over time. When you said social determinants of health, the light bulb went off. And so, yes, now I'm making the connection point. So when we talk about well-being, that is holistic health, health in all types of ways. And so that's really good. And it goes back to what you were saying before, where you started to name some of the ways in which the work that you're doing helps to support people in their well-being. And, what it reminded me of is almost like a personal life strategy, right? Let's help you develop a personal life strategy. Well, I've been paying attention to the chat, and we have a comment that's come in that I would love to just kind of amplify. And it comes from Patrick. And thank you so much, Patrick, for being here and sharing. But this goes back to when we were talking about, the naming or the labeling of DEI, DEIB, JEDI, all the different things. And the commentary here is, instead of DEI, perhaps focusing on company culture, where companies can measure such as ESG. And we're seeing a lot of that of late with organizations kind of having this type of work that really is also described as DEI, B work under the environmental social governance kind of division. But publicly listed companies need ESG reports in order to get investors. That's true. So sometimes we have to think intently about what are some strategic ways we can garner the engagement and the interest of other influencers that can help us move the needle around this work. Any thoughts to that?
Yeah, so I mean, what Patrick is saying is a good point. And, this is one of the things that I actually talk about a great deal. So, the challenge with this is that if you put DEI under ESG, which many companies are doing right now, or they're putting it under sustainability, because of, cuts and things like that, and because of all of the backlash for DEI, there is the possibility of it getting lost. And so that becomes the challenge, right?
Yes.
You don't want to put it under ESG or sustainability and it gets lost. And then it just becomes about company culture or company fit. Because when you talk about company culture and company fit, that looks very different for marginalized communities, for people of color, right? So if I say, we're not going to focus on, DEI, we're going to focus on company culture. Well, what does that really look like, right? So somebody might say, oh, how do I know I fit in here? How do I know that I'm included here? If we're just focusing on company culture. And company culture is multifaceted. So it is, it's inclusion and belonging, right? But it's also psychological safety.
It
What are you
is.
doing to ensure that individuals feel safe, that they feel seen, and that they feel heard? And so that is often why we have to amplify DEI versus putting it under something else. When you
completely agree.
Start talking about the return on investment, this is what I believe Patrick is talking about. People want to see what is the ROI, and because DEI is not a metric, often like, well, how do we know that this is working? But here's what I can tell you as it relates to the metrics. And I had a really good conversation with a people officer recently in a municipality. The things that you can tell and the reasons why you know that it's working is because you have less people calling out. Your retention rate and your attrition rate is less. You have less lawsuits. So these are the less payouts. These are the things that people are looking at. These are the things that your general counsel is trying to figure out. Okay, we've got all of these lawsuits because, we did X, Y, and Z. And these companies are having to pay a great deal. So when you talk about reporting out, these are the things that people want to know. And if you put that under ESG, those things won't be highlighted.
Yeah, I so appreciate this. And by the way, we're all going to be shifting for our final 10 minutes. And so I'll go ahead and give the warning for those of you who have some questions or curiosities you're holding and you would like to present those live. If you're part of the Zoom community, then you can just use the raise hand feature and I'll be happy to call on you and spotlight you to present your commentary, your questions. Or if you just would prefer to place your questions into the chat, we'll make sure we continue to pay attention to the chat. So while you're thinking of maybe your questions, I want to just lean in a little bit more into what you just shared, Dr. Venessa. This is a big phenomenon. I mean, we're seeing it left and right in so many organizations, and I think that at one point in time, and this is still part of a lot of the tension points that I'm hearing, is when people were moving the work of DEI from being kind of a separate entity like finance or marketing or whatever, and they were moving it under HR, there was some criticisms there. And there are pros and cons to that, but I, like you, I'm of the persuasion that I believe it needs to live on its own. Certainly, there needs to be a lot of, strategic alliance and partnership work and collaboration, because a big piece of it is the human capital piece, and that falls under HR. But it's not just about people. It's also about your processes and your operations across so many other dimensions and aspects of an organization. And so now we are, here having a conversation where we are acknowledging that even when it's placed under a different category, like the environmental, social governance, that, okay, maybe it's being buried there. I don't understand why it can't just live on its own.
I completely agree. We're living in a difficult economic time, right? And in a
Yeah,
difficult environment in which we've got 34 bills across the country in just on higher education alone that
yeah,
are trying to do away with DEI, that are changing, higher education dynamics left and
right,
right. And so, and that's not even including the bills that are not in higher education. I'm just
right.
giving you, what I see in those areas. But I have people that are coming to me that live in some of those states that have bills that are in their state houses right now that are trying to figure out if they're going to have jobs, if they're going to be able to continue to do DEI the way they've been doing it. And so there's just a lot of concern around that right now. And I think that we do have to continue to try to be vigilant and continue to amplify this work. We're just in that time in which we have
Yeah,
to. And we're on a
yeah,
world stage right now. And I think what the one good thing I will say that kind of occurred in 2020 as a result of George Floyd is that this became a global issue. So we knew that things were happening, but now it's a global issue in which you see people in other countries are starting to deal with their issues around racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. They're looking at
mhm,
anti-racism initiatives. I've got a mentee who's in London, who's in the UK, and the work that she's doing around anti-racism, and she's trying to do. And it's just, this is not the time for us to back down. I think this is a time
not.
for us to continue to be vigilant.